All right, welcome to our final presentation of the morning. This is from Dr. Nancy Martin, who's a lecturer in apparel design at San Francisco State University. Dr. Martin teaches studio courses and lecture courses in apparel design and merchandising. Her research has included the designer Hannah Troy, who translated couture into American ready-to-wear during the mid-20th century, and the dress of North Dakota's Black Sea Germans. She was an editor of the textbook Communicating Fashion, Trend Research and Forecasting, which appeared in 2023, and as a member of the Play project team, currently collaborates with student game developers to create digital and analog games to be played alongside that textbook. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Nancy Martin.
Thank you so much for that introduction. Do I have this in a good spot? All right. Well, I think we're going to see some similarities from Dr. Broughton's presentation, definitely some similar sources as well as some similar or same images. The title of my presentation today is A Stocky, Almost Round Appearance, an analysis of German-Russian women's dress from 1850 to 1900. And I'll just note that I go back and forth between German-Russian and Germans from Russia and GFR. So just in case you're not clear on what all those mean. I'd like to first begin with an acknowledgement to Dr. Ann Broughton, who has been so supportive of me in both my master's work as well as in my PhD. We do not come from the same institution. We're from across the country. So I really feel like she's gone above and beyond, and I appreciate her so much. So first slide. The focus of my presentation today actually comes from a comment that she made at my master's oral presentation. Don't know if you remember this, but I used this image thinking that this was what the Germans were wearing when they came from Germany and began their migration to Russia. And Dr. Broughton very kindly said, this may not be an accurate representation. So in fact, this image shows strong Bavarian influences that has come to be recognizable as for this whole sort of Germanic region. There are similarities, but what we see in the accessories and in the furnishing behinds are more of a Austrian origins than the German region from which the Black Sea Germans came. For my master's thesis, I analyzed garments from newly arrived, that was my goal, immigrants from the Black Sea region of Russia to North Dakota. And I analyzed 6 items of dress attributed to German-Russian origins that we can see on this slide. However, the question of what the GFRs were wearing when they left Germany has continued to intrigue me. And the opportunity to present at this symposium has allowed me to return to this question and sort of rekindle this interest. And so I expect to continue this research after this symposium. For this presentation, I wanted to focus on women's dress and the combination of elements that make up this rectangular silhouette. Not sure if this is going to work, but the first slide on the left side is what I'm focusing on. And I found this photo in the book Along the Trails of Yesterday by Nina Wishek. She wrote this little book in 1941 about McIntosh, North Dakota. She lived in this area as a young woman and witnessed the influx of the Germans from Russia as they came, beginning in the late 1800s and early 1900s. So this book provides important primary source data about this group. In this photo, you can see these women, and especially I want to point out the younger girl exhibit this rectangular silhouette, which is defined by a high waist and a protruding abdomen. Wisik describes it as a stocky, almost round appearance. And it is evident to a lesser degree in some of these other photos. So try to close up here and here, as I meant, well, I haven't, oh, never mind. So these photographs are from the very early years of the GFR migration to America. And because of their relative isolation of their villages in Russia and a strong pride in being German, I believe that at least some of these elements were clung onto from Germany to Russia to America. And strong religious conviction may have been a component of that, despite changes in fashionable clothing trends. So here I present photographic evidence that traces this silhouette from Germany to Russia to America. I note again that the photograph that I find the most intriguing here is the center one with the young girl. Photographs that are found in North Dakota are incredibly rare. And if you can find them, they're incredibly hard to see. Luckily, documentary evidence is available. So in my presentation, I will define the components that make up this distinctive silhouette, which I believe has been inadequately addressed in previous literature. And then I'm going to speculate about what it signals. What does it communicate? Why they would have dressed this way. So the impetus for my research is my own heritage. My mother is the product of two Black Sea Germans who met in, who were born in North Dakota, but met in Stockton, California, and then married. This is a photograph of my mother's side of the family from 1899 approximately. And I just want to note here that they are rural farmers. They are also wearing fairly contemporary dress. It might not be the height of fashion, but they are aware of what is going on in fashion. So a little background to this group of people that we've gotten quite a bit of background on already. So you'll be tested at the end of this presentation. The Germans were invited to emigrate to the Black Sea area of Russia by Tsar Alexander I in 1804. And this was a reinstatement of the original invitation by Catherine the Great, but this time targeting skilled farmers and tradesmen to colonize this South Russia region. And the Germans were motivated by religious conviction, poverty, and war to leave Germany. During this time, Germany was not yet a sovereign nation, and this region here that is circled, the Alsace region, flip-flopped between French and German rule. And so this was one aspect that was made it interesting for them to leave the area. And moving to Russia, they received generous incentives, such as the establishment of German villages, which were considered ethnic enclaves, where they were free from military conscription. They could govern their own villages and speak in their own language. And what was really important, follow their own religious convictions. So villages were established by religious orientation, whether Catholic or Protestant. A political shift in 1861 propelled the German colonists to begin their second migration, which came to be called the double diaspora. Under Tsar Nicholas III, Russian began to look inward to Russianize the country. The serfs were freed in 1861, and the privileges granted the German colonists were revoked. Foremost in the German-Russian decision to migrate was the reinstatement of military conscription. These colonists were then targeted by agents of the Northern Pacific Railroad with the incentive of the Homestead Act to come and basically improve the land in in the Dakota, the plains. When the Germans migrated to America, they came through Ellis Island and then traveled to the end of the line in Eureka, in the Dakota Territory, and spread northward in a triangle called the German-Russian Triangle. So that shows, this image shows that this is post the division between North and South Dakota, but it shows the triangle there. For research into the region where the colonists came from, this Württemberg, Alsace-Palatinate area, I rely heavily upon the work of Sarah Hume, who analyzed the dress of Alsace from its transition from traditional to folk dress. And she defines folk dress as the emergence of a style of dress to represent the entire region out of a multiplicity of local styles. And she elaborates that this served a variety of political aims. So her work has helped me identify these components that make up this stocky silhouette. She uses these two images here to introduce her thesis. That traditional dress, as opposed to folk dress, did not remain frozen, but was subject to change and responded to fashionable dress of the time, albeit much more slowly. And first, I'd like to just go over the components that we can see here. If you're not familiar with historical dress, you may not know. Both women are wearing a shift or a chemise at the bottom layer, which you can see peeking out of the top there. They're wearing a high-waisted ankle-length skirt with, in this case, a white apron, and either a long-sleeve jacket or a corselet and a stomacher, neck scarves, and differing headdresses. So who can tell me what a stomacher is? A stomacher is a decorative element that inserted either under or over, I think, I'm not over, the corset or corselet, the short corset here. I was so excited to find these in the Alsatian Museum. These date to about 1900. I've never been really clear about what a stomacher is, and so this was very helpful for me. Here we can see in a closer image that the men's dress represents a faster adoption of fashionable dress than the women. These two images were intended to show that the two styles of dress that are worn here in this rural area were worn at the same time. The man on the left is wearing breeches, the short pants, and the man on the right is wearing long pants. Men began wearing long pants in solidarity with the working class of France against the aristocracy during the French Revolution of 1789. So in terms of fashionable dress, breeches would have been considered old-fashioned by the time these lithographs were made in 1834. Dr. Hume notes, as I have found as well, that men responded to change more rapidly than women. And this is apparent in the more dramatic changes that we can see in the dress of the men here. There's quite a bit of differences. Maybe you might not notice, besides the long pants, he's wearing a jacket with lapels. This image is supposed to be a tricorn hat, but doesn't really look like one to me, but so they say. And he's wearing a different hat here, so there's quite a bit of differences. But the women, the only difference that we can see here is in the upper body, in the jacket, which is the sort of old-fashioned, and in the more modern version is the corselet and the stomacher. So what this pair of lithographs shows us is that fashion, even these rural people were responding to fashion change, and that both old-fashioned and modern fashions were being worn at the same time. Dr. Hume goes on to assert that the perception of static costume is a phenomenon that began in the 1850s, and this would have been before the GFRs migrated. I'm sorry, after they migrated. Traditional dress in these villages was religiously affiliated. And as you can see here, this is a procession of a Catholic procession in this region. Religious affiliation was expressed through color, with red being associated with Catholic and blue or black, other colors like that, Protestant. And then alongside these differing headdresses. So here they're wearing red bows, but in later photographs, we'll see black bows, and then also the very elaborate bowline hood, which I'm sure I'm saying wrong. Let's see. So later, folk dress was politically contrived. This shift happened slowly, but was a transition that was buoyed by changes in production of fashionable clothing. Amy Hughes, another scholar, has found also a political connection with folk dress versus traditional, and how it was used by the Nazis during their occupation. It was a way of inventing a tradition so that a new form of dress was identified as folk dress as being symbolic of this whole a whole region. By the 1930s, the whole Germanic region had been assigned a fixed dress that references the more Austrian version that we saw earlier. So my thesis is that during the time the Germans were leaving Württemberg in the early 1800s, they were wearing more of this kind of more religiously expressive dress. And they sustained to some extent that dress through their years in Russia. And they brought that to America, rather than the cliche version of German dress that we identify with that region today, and what I showed in my introductory slide. And in fact, this notion is presented also by this German-Russian scholar, Joseph Haidt. He recorded these images in his publication, Paradise on the Steppe, that notes where these Germans from Russia came from. This first image shows a very similar silhouette to what we've been looking at, some of the different elements in terms of the scarf and the apron, the short jacket. We'll look at a few more images in just a second, but I just wanted to trace this silhouette along the GFR migration route. This morning, as I was doing another run through here, I reread this quote and I was like, this is really important, and I didn't recognize it. It's so funny how those things happen. So I just want to just note it, and then maybe we'll come back to it. According to Joseph Haidt, of the traditional headgear of the women folk, all that survived was the kerchief. The bodice and the shoulder shawl disappeared, but several items of the old, thank you, were faithfully preserved, naming the voluminous skirt, the jacket, and the Sunday apron. And the word bodice is what's important to me here. Okay. So here we can see some images of these from Russia. These come from the Gluckstallers heritage book. Again, I want to point out the youthful female here, and some of the other images that show this kind of stocky silhouette. And then again, this is some images from the Harper's article that Anne showed earlier. Especially this one, and then this one is, I love this image of the little girl here, if you can see that. Again, it has that high-waisted silhouette. I believe this shows, or I believe that the Germans were wearing dress styles that's still associated with religion when they left Russia for America. These dress styles relate to styles worn at the same time in other German ethnic enclaves, such as the Pennsylvania Dutch, the Mennonites, and the Hutterites. Slightly later, more fashionable would be the short vest, corselet, and stomacher. I have seen no evidence and don't expect to find any stomachers in the Black Sea German dress, but the high-waisted silhouette is present. I just wanted to note, so part of what I am looking at is, what elements were carried through and what were not. And we saw this image yesterday of the Mennonite women. I was contacted by a Mennonite scholar who is looking at indigo prints, and she shared this image with me, noting the headdress. So she's a Mennonite woman. She settled in Kansas, but she is, well, she says that this headdress was actually made in America, but I think it's interesting that it was continued as a tradition. My focus is really today is on the silhouette, and we have some more photographs, but I think that the documentary evidence in this case is a little bit better to get this point. So I have 4 quotes that I'm going to read that describe this same silhouette by other authors. And the first one comes from Adolf Schuck. The women wore full skirts drawn tight over their stomachs, which gave them a bulging appearance below the waistline, ample sleeve waistcoats, and white laced bordered aprons. And we've already seen this quote by Nina Wishik. The German-Russian skirts were gathered full, worn high, and cinched in at the waist to create a stocky, almost round appearance. Another quote from Wishik. The women wore heavy woolen skirts made extremely full and quite short and attached to a fitted underwaist. Over the tight waist to which the skirt was fastened was worn a blouse or over jacket, which was removed when working. And then my last quote comes from A Bit of Europe in Dakota, the Harper's Weekly article of 1896. This is a little bit longer, but the women are slower to change. They are still clinging religiously to their bright short skirts, their white aprons, and the shawls about their heads. Such merry finery as I saw, shawls of many hues for the head, embroidered in fancy colored silk thread patterns, bodices of black, red, or yellow, skirts of red, purple, or green, falling like truncated cones from the broad hips to the coarse shoes, aprons of white, yellow, or pink. The main purpose of my presentation today is to identify the components that make up this distinctive silhouette, stocky, almost round, and to see if it originated in Württemberg, and then to speculate about what it means, what it communicates. Though these components are easily identified and standard, I think, to rural dress all over Europe, what intrigues me is how these pieces were composed on the body that produce this shape which reflects little of the true body form. So now we'll get into it. Photographs were taken in 1800 by Joseph Spindler, documenting the rural Alsatian dress that shows this same silhouette. A close-up of this little girl's skirt shows several rows of tight gathers and how it creates sort of a poof below, similar to the mother. And these are called cartridge pleats, and they are made by taking sort of fairly large 1/4 to 3/4 inch stitches evenly, and then very parallel rows of them, pulling them very tightly. These skirts were made in fabrics that hold their shape. Both these people here, as well as the Germans that migrated, that lived in Russia and then came to America, also had fabrics that held their shape. In both Russia and America, they were felted, so they had a lot of structure to them, and that would have contributed to this truncated cone shape. Oh, and then I wanted to note this last photo to underscore the findings of Dr. Hume that fashionable dress was happening at the same time as rural dress. And so, as you can see here, the 4 young girls are wearing this sort of celebratory traditional dress. And then we have this young woman here that's wearing more of a fashionable jacket. I found this photo to be particularly helpful. It's rare to be able to see the back of a garment. And here we can see how, as I overheard a question, how the scarf might have been fastened in the back. The jacket seems to cover the whole apron area, so it's sort of a later addition. And then I just want to note the extreme headdresses. So this is not my focus here, but they're sort of really, strong feature here. Each village had its own interpretation. In this case, we see large bows. And in the previous one, we saw the pom-poms, big pom-poms. So every village had its own very distinctive headdress, and they're all as dramatic as this. Except for this, for the image that I just showed of the Mennonite woman with the traditional headdress, we've found no evidence that these headdresses were brought from Germany to Russia to America. But then it is possible. Here we can see an example of the corselet that Dr. Hume analyzed from the Alsatian Museum that shows this same cartridge pleating and parallels the quote from Nina Wishick, where she says that it was attached to a fitted underwaist. This is the only reference in GFR documents, except for the bodice quote that I just gave you a few minutes ago, where it talks about a bodice being sewn to a skirt, an underwaist sewn to a skirt. So I'm assuming that this is similar to the corselet documented by Dr. Hume. And in further research, I will be looking for evidence for this. I would speculate that this is actually a child's garment because of the shortness, and it has stitching at the, simulates a princess line, but it's not really doing any fitting for an older person. Oh, and then also, this is a back view. So you can just see right at this little section here, the lacing and the center front area. These are examples of cassocans or jackets that came from the Alsatian Museum. These do show evidence of curved princess lines as well as darts. So they were worn by adult women. And then this is the jacket that I studied in North Dakota. It's similar, but different as well. I'm trying to make a connection between these two. This tourist website for Alsace confirmed my suspicion about the aprons. This is one of the Spindler, well, maybe one of the Spindler photographs. And notice how she has the bow in the front. The Alsatian website confirmed that they actually, according to Alsatian tradition, wrapped the bows around the body and then tied it in, wrapped the ties around the body and then bowed it in the front. These are 2 of the women's garments that I studied previously in North Dakota. Call this the Martel skirt, that is the donor. It was dated to 1900, produced in Russia, and it has a lot of evidence of being altered. The skirt was oriented on the cross grain, made of 1 length of fabric and 1 seam. And modern alterations include the waistband, and there is a pocket here, which is not obvious in this photo, but it's very obvious in the real thing. These were sewn by machine, but the rest of it was sewn by hand. It's possible that at one time this skirt was attached to an underwaist corselet and that the opening was at the center front. So I say that because it does have the hand-sewn cartridge pleating on it. Since skirts were always covered with an apron, it's almost impossible to tell what the original orientation was. I think that a side opening was probably a more modern convention, and that the original opening was at the center front. And it was my comparison with the Pennsylvania Dutch skirts that suggested this to me. And then I found this useful sketch through the Alsatian Museum again, which again shows this orientation at the center front opening. So then the apron would cover that. So putting this all together, I have a little mock-up. I did a little bit of experimental archaeology is what they call it. This is a half-scale dress form. So it's proportionally correct, you know, for a size, what, 8-person, something like that. And it's a mock-up, so I only did half of it. I did it in muslin. I tried using color, but I just, I guess I don't need to get into that long story. All right, giving this front view here on the camera. So my original intention was to start from the inside out, but it takes me a long time to get everything back together. So I'm going to go from the outside in here. As we know, we've heard from Dr. Broughton, the women wore lots of shawls. They wore shawls over their shoulders. They wore shawls over their heads. I should note that the references that I relied upon for creating this are up here to some extent. So I was really struck by how the shawl was wrapped around, and then in these Alsatian images of it being either tucked or tied in the back. So I did pin it to her body. So that's potentially one way. They also, you know, we saw they tied it as well. For the jacket, we do have evidence that they say puffed, you know, puffed sleeves. So, and again, it was sort of all done in this cartridge pleating fashion, which is even stitches. So I did it like that in the sleeve. So mostly I took this jacket from the image that I found or the garment that I found in North Dakota, but also from the images from Sarah Hume. They're very short. So I want to really make the point that what elements create this high-waisted, very stocky, square, rectangular silhouette. So this high-waisted jacket contributes to that. So in this case, it has darts, but you know, the other one that is in North Dakota does not. Right, disrobe her. I don't know whether they actually wore corselettes, these short little corsets. I chose to do it as a vest. I'm looking for evidence, you know, of anything. You know, it's just an interpretation. Maybe some people did, and then it may have been dropped very quickly, which is what Joseph Haidt tells us. Okay, so next after the jacket is the apron, and here we've noted that it wraps all the way around the body. I think that the apron was also made with cartridge pleats because that's just how they kind of did it. This is be related to the workmanship of habit, how things were kind of done. It's done, I mean, from what I learned from this experiment is that it's done from the outside in, and today, we make clothing inside out. So little apron there. And then this corselet attached to the underwaist is here, and I won't take this whole thing off, but just to give you an idea. So what makes this really puffy kind of bulk underneath there is by these cartridge pleats, I think. All right, so take this off. And then the last part is the chemise or slip. So this is also very interesting because it seems like in America and in Europe, clothing gets more sophisticated, but the chemise stays very simple. It's basically made of one piece of cloth. It has no shoulder seam, so it's literally like wrapped over the body like that. And then it has things like gussets and godets at the side, which give it either some flair or the ability to move. So this is definitely what you see in the Pennsylvania Dutch clothing as well. And even, everybody was wearing shirts that were made like this during this time. I guess I had one other point to make there, that in the images from Alsace that we've seen, the women are wearing very elaborate headdresses. I want to note that these were celebratory religious occasions, and obviously not everyday wear. I'm guessing that women covered their heads with shawl or head shawls for everyday wear in both Germany and Russia. In America, they're always seen with fringe shawls on their head or over their shoulders, or striped wool shawls. These are the subject of Dr. Broughton's research, and she found that these shawls served many purposes over a lifetime, from skirts to shawls to baby carriers and blankets. We know that as I've said, the Germans in Russia and also in America felted their wool to make it warmer. And it also appears that the strong color associations that we see in Germany are faded. So the Martel skirt that you see here is red, but it comes from a Protestant village. So when putting all these components together, a stocky, almost round silhouette seems primarily to be achieved through the cartridge pleating, the high waist, and the wrapping of the different elements, such as the apron, the shawls, and the skirts. And it presents a compressed assemblage. All right. In the study of dress, scholars often use the phrase, dress reflects the zeitgeist, meaning that it aesthetically expresses the spirit of the time in which it was produced and worn. So next I'm going to move into considering why this silhouette was valued. Dr. Marilyn DeLong from the University of Minnesota formulated a method for analyzing these aesthetic components and how they echo the sentiments of the time. Her focus was on modern fashion, so a corollary to my study is whether her theory holds true for traditional dress as well. And I feel like these images from Württemberg exemplify the silhouette, and I applied the aesthetic framework to the one on the left. We don't know when this photo was taken, but we know that these individuals were born in 1830s. So we might speculate that it's somewhere around 1850 or later. Okay. The aesthetic framework takes the researcher through 4 operations. Whoops. And this slide is talking about observation and differentiation. I should read that all. Observation, differentiation, interpretation, and evaluation. The first 2 are observation and differentiation, and these ask questions that facilitate the process of slow looking. This is, in a nutshell, non-judgmental categorization of the design elements. DeLong has applied the principles of design collected through the analysis of art to dress and helps us interpret and evaluate aesthetic components. It takes as its premise that design is intentional, not random. For my purposes, I have found that the elements and components of dress directly relate to the values of a culture. And looking at this image in the observation phase, I used the following descriptors: square, substantial, puffy, ample, compressed, dark, and round. In the differentiation phase, I noticed how the waist bow is the most forward in the composition. It's a unique feature, and it masks the natural waist. The bow is the focus, not the waistline. Each component of the ensemble must be donned individually, and many are wrapped components. In this composition, the head bow visually compresses the figure vertically, and all of the wrapped components compress it horizontally. Next is the interpretation phase, in which we have free association. Material culture people like free association. Here I made associations with skirt from the 1960s that also had high waists that are tubular and cinched in. I also made associations with grass hula skirts and Russian nested dolls. I wrote, the body seems to be encased in the form, making her appear to be bulging out like she's wearing something too small, like a sausage. I used the following terms to explore that interpretation: belly emphasis, layer cakes, dolls, immovable, prettied up, dome, sturdy, stocky, matronly, and stolid. In the interpretation phase finishes with the question, what is the message? To which I responded, matronly, one who has children, a signal of health and prosperity, bloated at the waist will topple over. In the evaluation phase, we are asked about how these reflect values in the culture of ownership. And I categorized my observations into 4 areas. This culture valued prosperity, the exhibition of a bulging silhouette, an appreciation of what it means to wear something that's too small for you, showing the ability to grow out of a current size. Matronly, the exhibition of having lived long and already had children. Stolid, being able to stand on your own, independent and unemotional. Prettied up, being put on a pedestal, presented as if for display, important, decorated, and honored. And I think the real evidence for this shows that this value in this culture is presented by the young girls who are not at the age of procreation, but they do exhibit a silhouette as if they were. And then it's also important to note, to consider the impression of these women as sort of layer cakes or dolls. They appear as if on a pedestal, and that impression is supported by the fact that the women in these portraits are standing, and many of these portraits, not just these, the woman is standing and the man is sitting down. We'll take a short detour to look at what was fashionable in this time, in contrast to traditional dress. In the picture on the left, we see this fashionable dress after the French Revolution, which was a return to classical Greek and Roman aesthetics. We do see a distinctive high waist, as we saw in the traditional dress, but I would describe this image as youthful. It exposes the body, where on the image on the right, which is another Spindler image of this traditional dress in Alsace, had this more matronly wrapped look, encased. The prevailing opinion is that fashion trickles down from the upper classes to the lower classes. But in this era, the upper classes were looking to were influenced by the perceived idyllic country life, and they began to wear these very filmy muslin shifts. So at least in this example, the direction of fashion is going the other direction. Does not explain why the high waist is important or why the rural people would have interpreted it differently. In the final question, we're asked the value of the apparel item in our own culture. So this, of course, is from my Western eyes. We do see this silhouette repeating through the ages. This first painting is by Jean van Eyck, very famous painting from 1434. It's a wedding portrait that has been recently reinterpreted. Scholars now believe that this green dress is a demonstration of opulence. She might look pregnant to our eyes, and we might question why she looks pregnant in a wedding photo. But scholars now believe that this green dress is a demonstration of opulence, that she's holding up this massive yardage against her body, and so it's showing that they are very wealthy. And I think this message is also being communicated in the traditional German dress. The more clothing I wear, the more well off I am. We also see this high-waisted silhouette in the 1950s and 60s, demonstrating the value of producing children during this time. Beginning the baby boom generation. In my research for my PhD dissertation, I found this very distinct shift in 1955 in fashionable dress in Vogue and stuff like that, where they have all these images or references to things like bonnets and baby caps and things like that. So this, focus on having children trickled into fashion trends as well. The value can be summed up as exhibiting prosperity, the ability to have a lot of children and to be strong, substantial, and independent. Culturally, this ethnicity is patriarchal, as documentary evidence confirms. Yet the dress and the study of material culture gives us a fuller, more nuanced version of this history to illustrate the value that women held in this society. This value is precedent on the fact that the more children you produce, the greater your prosperity, but also being able to demonstrate the strength to work side by side with men on the farms, often while carrying and literally holding children. I think this is my last slide. Oh, there, sorry. So I hope I've presented adequate evidence to show that the distinctive rectangular silhouette that we have seen in the photographs of the GFR women originated from Württemberg in the 1800s before they began their migration. This costume expressed religious affiliation, namely expressing plain folk, that is somber clothing that showed Protestant convictions versus the more ornate red and ornamented pieces of the Catholic villages. This dress was first religiously differentiated and then secondly, regionally differentiated. And after the 1850s, this began to take more of a political differentiation where each region needed to be represented by a type. Through attempting to replicate the garments using similar methods, or I could say a variety of methods, I believe I've uncovered the components and method needed to create the stocky, almost round appearance. And I was struck through that experience of the amount of wrapped, bulky, and compressive garments needed to create a form that appears too big for what it's wearing. These components help us determine what was valued in this culture: the need to appear prosperous and show the ability to be healthy and strong, so to bear many children. The material culture evidence shows a different side of the documentary evidence. Despite being a patriarchal society, women had great value as being the key to prosperity, as evidenced through their standing pose in staged photographs. Thank you very much.